before you and I were born, restaurants were not able to do credit card processing either because of the risk of chargebacks. And I don't know if you remember those days. I certainly wasn't committing commerce at that time. And I think that is a perfect demonstration of, in our lifetime, restaurants were able to do credit card processing. And so I think that goes directly into the cannabis conversations of this is a slow marching effort that it takes time for clients in payments and banking all to come together to recognize that, yes, cannabis is in fact a legitimate industry and a space that is worth investing into.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cannabis Accounting Podcast. Today, I have with me Don Raleigh III of Evolve Payments, cannabis payments consultant, 2025 TOPS payment leader. I can let him introduce himself a little bit more, but me and Don met in Minnesota a few months ago during Cannabis Expo conference week there. That's where he's based out of, so he's got that Midwest friendliness to him, but he's on the payment processing side. And what I found just your business really interesting is you've done this for other companies in the small to medium size mid-market range. And so you've just been around for a couple of decades. You're a family business. And yes, you're new to cannabis, but you are not new to payment processing compliance. I think of this as, let's not reinvent the wheel for payment processing with cannabis. Like, compliance is where we want to lean into somebody with your expertise that's just tried it in other newer industries that we're evolving. So with that being said, Don, just for those that don't know, if you want to introduce yourself to the audience, we'll go from there.
Excellent. I really appreciate the introduction, Raymond. Thanks for having me on the show, and thank you for Dope CFO Certified Advisors for having different industry experts come in to provide clarity, confidence, and overall solutions for their clients. So thank you for having me. And I like to have a lot of the conversations in the payment processing space that my certifications come from PBC out in Washington, DC. It stands for Payments, Banking, and Compliance. I'm currently level 1 and level 2 certified that I've gone through the banking rules, regulations, and compliance attestations. And so I know a little bit more about the behind the scenes operations, but I'm not coming from the perspective of just being a payment provider. It's more of the compliance standpoint. So that's why my title is shifted to the compliance payment consultant, because it's a little bit more nuanced than just setting up clients with payment solutions. We partner oftentimes with back-end banks. We partner with different CPA organizations because we need clarity in the space. We all know that payments has been one of the largest pain points in the cannabis industry, not just from a collection standpoint of getting money from customers, but how do you actually facilitate some of those non-cash payments? So I'm looking forward to leaning in with you, Raymond, and having a great conversation.
Nice. And yeah, payment processing is still a thing. And we get lots of questions about it. And I, as my CPA, I'm like, what's the compliance thing? So just whatever you do, just make sure it's compliance, because no one's trying to break the rules, but it's, as we were talking off camera, the rules are changing so quickly. And when you're in a newer industry, we're making the rules for the first time. Some of them aren't even changing, but they're like being created for the first time. So that in mind a little bit, can you just talk a little bit about how Evolve got started? I know when we spoke, it was really interesting where you were talking about your dad was a little bit early on of serving some of these e-commerce type companies. So again, you've been through this. I remember life without pre-internet and no e-commerce, and you had to go to the store, but now e-commerce, very common. Everybody has their card plugged into Amazon. But can you just talk a little bit about how Evolve Payments got started serving some of these newer industry?
Absolutely. More than happy to cover that. So Evolve Payment is coming up on our 25th year of being in operation. My father came from an organization up here in the Midwest, and you'll hear my Minnesotan accent come through. So prepare the airwaves for that coming out. But my father came out of the military, where he did a lot of military interrogation specialization. And he realized that languages were very easy to replicate. And I think he speaks 15, 16 languages or something like that. And just beyond impressive guy. He got out of the military and met a girl, tale as old as time, just like be my mother. And they realized that the military was not something that they wanted for their future. So my father left and transitioned off of the military, got his DD-214, and realized that there was this brand new language that was coming out in the late 90s or 2000s called coding. And it was this brand new thing. Nobody really knew what this language was. And so he started looking different angles and went to the library. And he doesn't have photographic memory, but he has near perfect recall. So if he reads something, he can remember it. And I wish that I had that talent. Maybe a part of me is thankful I don't. He will read a book and remember it. And he shares the story about being able to read these coding textbooks. And then the following day, walked into a corporation called Controlled Data, interviewed for a position, and got a job as a coder, and eventually worked his way up to be one of their senior leaders to build out systems like the Chicago Board of Trade, a lot of financial and fiduciary transactions. He was the one building out that system. He also built out systems for different insurance agencies where you would be able to transact and conduct confidential information through the internet, as well as being on the team of one of several thousand people that built out SMS text messaging. And my father saw the writing on the wall of this thing called e-commerce, and control data said that the average American is far too smart to put credit card processing online. Think about all the fraud, think about all the potential for stolen information. There's a reason why control data isn't around anymore, and Evolve Payment has rooted through that. So I always tell the story about how cannabis is another new market. And before you and I were born, Raymond, restaurants were not able to do credit card processing either because of the risk of chargebacks. And I don't know if you remember those days. I certainly wasn't committing commerce at that time.
But I do remember the cash only and the checkbooks, like a physical checkbook. I still see cash. It's becoming more rare. I almost never see a checkbook unless it's a large purchase. But I remember like restaurant, you'd still write out the check. So yes, now I remember.
Absolutely. And I think that is a perfect demonstration of in our lifetime, restaurants weren't able to do credit card processing. And so I think that goes directly into the cannabis conversations of this is a slow marching effort that it takes time for clients in payments and banking all to come together to recognize that, yes, cannabis is in fact a legitimate industry and a space that is worth investing into. So I know we'll get into some of the timelines and future opportunities, but that's where Evolve Payment really got started, was this space of ambiguity. This technology didn't exist yet. So that's how we've been able to build out pretty cool systems like ASICS tennis shoes. We built out some really cool projects for different packaging organizations where taxonomy and nexus codes were very complex. And through a lot of the innovation that the team has been able to deliver for our clients in the quote unquote traditional card processing side, we approach the cannabis industry with really a deep understanding of we need to do this right for our clients. Because if we know where the future's headed, there's a lot of opportunity for everybody involved when we can do it right the first time and build confidence in these institutions that cannabis is not this dirty word. If we can have process and legitimacy within the space, we will see this happening faster where credit card processing will be compliant. It's just we need to do it right the first time and start with the basics.
No, I couldn't agree more with that. It's getting it right the first time. And I appreciate you breaking down the evolution of Evolve, pun intended, because it's really interesting. People think they'll never note it, experience change in our lifetime, and maybe it's just the sign of the times, but it's I lived through the internet. I remember that. And I remember internet going from just Facebook and some AOL chat room. So every day, my parents got smartphones. I remember when that was a thing. It's, oh, dude, this dude's never going to get a laptop, but if we could just get them a smartphone. And now they all have them. So AI is now kind of going to give you that. So it's happening. And then cannabis is just right there in with all of it. And you were talking about restaurants, and it really hit home to me of I've been in literally the Amazon rainforest in Iquitos, Peru. I've used my credit card. I've been in rural Mexico, at a mezcal factory, and I've been able to buy a bottle of mezcal. So it's how can I be in these really exotic rural places and my credit card works, but somehow in Chicago, Illinois, I still can't use my credit card. Or if I do, my clients have to worry about their business being shut down. So I guess just why do some of these payment rails, could you just define payment rails for some of the people that aren't behind the scenes in this stuff? Why are they important? Then why do they get shut down? And then why does that happen? Because in cannabis, it's more common than people think. And that's why we need to have backups and alternatives. So I guess just define the rails. Then why do they quote unquote shut off sometimes?
Yeah. And I think the veracity of these shutdowns is impossible to ignore. The first time that cannabis transactions were denied was back in 2019. When card networks started to crack down on miscoded cannabis transactions. And so they were essentially coding their business as opposed to Don's dispensary, it was Don's flower shop. Or you'll see sometimes in transactions on banking statements or credit card statements, it'll be an address as opposed to the name of the business. People are aware of what they're doing with the miscoding, and they're technically committing different types of RICO issues. They're committing fraud, essentially, with saying that they're operating one way, but actually has another. And so it goes into this whole ethos issue of if we want cannabis to be out of this space or the gray area into a fully operational industry, We got to stop cutting corners, but recognize that we need to be able to push the envelope. There's a delicate balance. And I'm going to be the first to say, we recognize that credit card payment processing is not compliant. It is not, you cannot compliantly conduct credit card transactions, nor can you compliantly conduct debit card transactions if they're using Visa, Mastercard, Discover, or American Express rails. There are alternative solutions available, but if you are talking to an organization or a payments processing provider, and I'll get some unique feedback from my friends in the industry, but at the end of the day, there's no compliant solution. And I think that there's a significant delta between a compliant payment option versus a legitimate payment option. Listen to the proposals and listen to what people are saying and pitching you, because if they say, trust me, bro, this is a legit processing solution, we've never been shut down, we're the only ones that have a relationship with Visa. I've been in the room with clients that have navigated this conversation before, and I'll say, all right, you have a letter from Visa, you have approval from Visa, show me. Produce the letter. Show me that you've gone through an audit before, and more importantly, you've survived the audit, not just gone through. Because we've seen situations like back in March of 2026, we had 1,000 cannabis ATM terminals get deactivated. And then as recent as June 15th, it's currently July 7th, but on June 15th, the Payment Alliance International deactivated about 6,000 payment terminals nationwide. And we're talking less than a month ago. And so this veracity is happening more and more frequently because Visa Mastercard is using AI to go in and scan these different processors, and you can no longer just flip the merchant ID. These businesses have to get new bank accounts. And if you're a cannabis operator, you know how difficult and frankly expensive it is to open up a cannabis related bank account. So that's why it's happening. It's because it's technically, if you look at how these payment rails are flowing, ask your provider, how many bank accounts does this touch? And if it's any more than 3 bank accounts in where the money is flowing, you may be unassumingly and unaware that you are being signed up for what is called the money laundering. And this is a very serious threat to a business because that's where it gets out of a compliance problem and into a federal illegality problem. A compliance issue, you get fined. We saw the fine in, in February of 2025, where Switch Commerce, a payment processing provider, sued TrueLeave for $950,000. Now, granted, TrueLeave is an MSO. We are all aware of that case. TrueLeave is still around today because they could swallow the $950,000 penalty from Switch Commerce. I don't know how many of you operators in small businesses can stomach that. It's something to consider. And so there's a difference between a penalty versus committing money laundering and being involved in federal white-collar crime. Think about it.
Just to explain a little bit, people just listening, because this is how I understood it as well as a CPA serving these customers, because my license is worth more to me than a few cannabis clients. I can serve anybody as a CPA. So I'm like, hey, I got to make sure you're legit, because it's like, I got all these other legit customers, not legit, but legal, that are federally legal. So same with you guys, where it's like legit versus compliance are two different things, and it's real in these, because we're learning so much and we're trying to find solutions. A legit solution might just solve the problem, but not with 100% dot the I, cross the T's compliancy. And to be long-term stable and to be going concerned, it needs to be compliant, because banks won't work with you, lenders won't lend with you. Like, all of these downstream effects come of just finding the quickest and easiest legit one to get started. And so it's very real. And then if your ATM does get shut down, like, of course, people understand that if it shuts your bank account down, that's important. But imagine the day of, when customers are used to coming to your small location retail store, maybe you have 3, and they're like, yeah, I just go to the ATM, and then all of a sudden that shuts down. So you actually lose that whole day of sales, and it will probably take multiple days to figure out an alternative. That's where having a compliant solution, which is like what Don is going to talk about next. All right, then what makes it compliant and how much does it cost? Because I'd rather just pay for that. Because that's what it is. Like, candidly, a lot of great business owners, they don't even know that they're just in a gray area with their payment solution. I got the ATM. Isn't that enough? I'm not accepting credit cards. They got to go there. And it's no, there's still more. And because so many payment providers wouldn't work with the cannabis industry, it created this gap of startups, like people trying to figure it out, which I'm sure you talk with a lot of payment processor, payment consultants, or somebody like Don, where my family's been around doing this, or my business has been here for a long time. So we know this really well, and we're small enough where we're privately held. So we can just decide if we want to serve this industry, if it's within our risk tolerance. So anyways, just even from legit to compliant, as you service these companies, it's a very real thing. And then people are confused when it gets shut down just purely for that reason. They didn't know it was a gray area. But with that in mind, I guess what makes them compliant then? So if some of them get shut down in a gray area, I guess that's like, how would you explain it to somebody that's like an operator or like myself, like still pretty naive to it? Like, just like, I hear so many people trying to sell me on why it's compliant. I'm like, all right, just tell me like black and white. Do I need to get a letter from the, Visa? What makes it compliant from your perspective, Don?
Yeah, great question. And I think that it's a frustrating point for everybody because a lot of these cannabis operators are tired of being lied to. They're tired of being set up to fail. They're tired of these fast and loose contracts that they aren't aware of, and they're getting so many things thrown at them where they just, at some point, it gets into this thing called decision fatigue. All right, whatever, sign up. I'm not going to read the 16-page contract that some of these organizations require. You don't have the time. You have the OCM inspection coming up. You have to do your final plans of record. You have to do all these things to get up and running. And payments, while should be a simple thing, is a little bit more complex. So I appreciate the phrase that compliance is at the behest of the operator. And you mentioned that you have APA license and you have accreditations and testing that you have to go through to prove to your customers, as well as to the different states in which you're operating, that you are a fiduciary responsible person and a party involved to make sure that your clients are doing what they need to be doing. They're paying their taxes. They're getting everything taken care of. And if you make a mistake, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Raymond, but as a CPA, if you make a mistake, you can be removed. You can have your CPA license revoked.
Oh yeah.
Is that accurate?
You can revoke it every 2 years. You have to apply for it. And they do the whole CPE requirement, but also have you been, like subpoenaed or had any like court cases or anything that came up during the process of serving clients, or any of your clients had any issues that came up in the client of serving them? So you have to like worry about yourself and then worry about your clients. And of course we have legalities and everything that are like supposed to keep us safe, but I'd just rather not deal with it.
Exactly. And I think the major focal point of that is you have to prove it. You do a lot of work. And whenever you have the 3 letters after your last name, it carries weight. Now, when it comes to the payment processing space, there is no oversight. There is no regulatory industry. There is no body to hold people accountable to. Just like how we saw the Switch Commerce situation happen, they've faced a fine and penalty from Visa and Mastercard, and they pass that on to their customer because it's written in their contracts. And so I advise clients about asking the simple question, does this open me to any risk for litigation from any from any third-party entities? So I'll say that again. Does this open me up to any potential risk from third-party providers or entities? And if the person hesitates and they cannot clearly articulate the answer, there's your answer right there. Now, be wary. There are very silver-tongued salespeople out there that know what they're doing. They're intentionally committing it just to make the quick buck. And what I would advise any merchant, a cannabis operator, to look into is asking, what rails does this payment solution run on? As it stands right now, there are only 3 rails that really work well within compliance for cannabis industries. One of them, of course, is cash. We've seen with our cannabis dispensaries across the nation that about 64% of all transactions are in the cash space. The leftover of that are in either ACH payments, which is where our product works very well, where we're able to have a web-based transaction where there's no app that needs to be downloaded. People can upload their banking information, very similar to a Venmo environment, and be able to do a peer-to-peer payment and do that bank-to-bank transaction, and payments are deposited next day. And that works really well. The third option is the cryptocurrency industry. And I know we'll touch on that a little bit, but in cryptocurrency, I always advise clients of asking the simple question of how many clients are currently working and processing through your system? What is the volume that your organization is doing nationally, not just within the state in which you're operating in, but nationally? And then have you been subjugated to any compliance inspections from different card brands? Because what we're seeing is there will be several different organizations that will say that they're in the crypto space and that you are buying a token, or a crypto gift card is another terminology for it, where you're able to conduct a Visa, Mastercard, or American Express transaction to buy a token cryptocurrency, where that cryptocurrency can then be converted back into cash at the point of sale at these cannabis dispensaries. And it's asking the question of, these cryptocurrencies are getting caught, too. And so I've seen several instances where clients have come to us and they've said, hey, Don, here's this really cool platform. Can you look into it and see if it's legit? Hopped on a call with the provider and I asked the question, how many merchants have you boarded? How many people are actually conducting this? And the conversation shortly thereafter faded away because they've not onboarded anybody. And I asked the client if they're willing to open up their business to be a guinea pig and carry the risk of if it doesn't work. That alone solves that pain point of, you need to find a solution that actually works. On the flip side of that, from a consumer standpoint, ask your consumers. As you open up your dispensaries, a lot of people are getting more and more intimate with their customers. And if you want to survive in this space, you have to have that brand loyalty and that customer re-engagement tool. Ask the question, hey, do you use cryptocurrencies? Would you purchase product with a cryptocurrency? And a really good litmus test is to have not only the ATM that is fully compliant, it's that actual cash machine that dispenses physical cash. A lot of the compliance issues that we're talking about is the cashless ATMs, so those terminals that round up and miscode everything. But if you are truly interested in cryptocurrency exchange, place a crypto ATM in your store and see what happens. We've had one instance where somebody had it for 6 months and all the crypto people that said that they would never even touched the machine. It's the logic behind that is because cryptocurrencies are looking at it as a investment portfolio. They're not seeing it as a transactionary opportunity yet because they can't go to the grocery store. They can't go to all these different places. And as much as we love the crypto community, we have to make sure that it's actually something that people are actually doing. So long-winded answer to say, but as it stands right now, the only 3 compliant ways is cash, ACH, or a bank-to-bank transfer, and cryptocurrencies if you have the customer base for it.
And then like logically, it's like we've talked through it. It's like even in B2B sales, it's not all businesses have their cash in crypto. And then to your point, because we're similar, it's like that's our like treasury. It's supposed to go up as the crypto goes up. I'm not using that for operations. I have a bank account with cash. I use real cash for operations. And so humans are similar in B2C world of I don't walk around with my crypto wallet. I'm using my crypto. So what if it goes up? I'm going to be pissed if I use this volatile currency to buy an eighth and now that eighth costs me $600.
But what's Bitcoin pizza that costs like
that's what I was thinking of. I was like, I don't want to be that guy. That would be embarrassing. Pizza's embarrassing enough. If you spent it on weed, you'd really be a loser. Good question. High level though about the federal, because the hearing is going on. So federal reform is a very like hot topic right now. How would federal reform, even if just for the medical side of the industry, affect like Visa and Mastercard being willing to start using their rails, quote unquote, for credit card payments? Or I guess, because that's my thought. It's they are big federal companies that have a ton of connections to the government. So they have to wait for federal legalization. But then once it comes, I'm sure it'll still be some time. But like how, in your perspective, will it for sure work? Or like what would make Visa and Mastercard willing to work with us?
Yeah, question. And I think that's the highest level of question that I can answer at this current time. Because again, a lot of my information comes from PBC, the Payments Banking and Compliance Conference in Washington, D.C. And last year, we had a very direct conversation with Fiserv. Fiserv is one of the major providers. It's them and TSYS and a few others that are the actual payment facilitators. So you have the card networks, the Visa, Mastercard, Discover, and American Express, and then the facilitators or processors, TSYS, Fiserv, et cetera. And it's those companies that we're getting this information from. And the news of moving it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 for federal does not yet change the compliance or quote unquote interest from the card brands. And until the card brands are fully entrusted, the processors won't engage with it in a complete way. And so my anticipation is that the product either needs to be deregulated and become a product like tobacco, like alcohol, et cetera, where it is still controlled, but it does not have the same federal illegality nationwide. The tough answer is, what does the timeline look like? Yeah. I said this last year when the Schedule 3 changes were starting to flow. I still anticipate 5 to 10 years away from this. And so the risk that businesses come to is, let's say that you listen to that, you're hearing this, and you say to yourself, the risk is actually worth it. And I want to engage in this because I know my customers are expecting it. They need a way of doing card payments and I need to do it. That is your prerogative. As a business operator, we live in the greatest country on this planet, and you can commit commerce the way that your business to operate. You just have to understand the risk associated with it. One of the other complications that comes into play is we are seeing clients that are knowingly and often bidding these non-compliant products is that they're being put on something called the match list. The match list is essentially MasterCard's naughty list. It stands for the Merchant Advisory to Control High Risk. And if you're put on the match list, you are not able to conduct credit card transactions with your EIN number as well as your social security number for 5 years. Depending on the range and depending on the offense, it can be upwards of 10 years if you're doing these types of things. It is incredibly challenging to get off the list. So imagine Trump waves a gavel and changes everything for this industry in 2 years' time. If you're put on the match list, you can still be barred from conducting credit card transactions because of this Merchant Advisory to Control High Risk list. So take that in consideration as you're navigating compliance and risk issues.
No, that is very interesting. And people are getting a little bit more just like long tail focus, but there is a little bit of that magic wand energy. People think like with federal reform will change a lot of things. And I'm with you. I'm like risk and like enterprise risk management is like always like a long-term game. No one's going to get fired for being like conservative and like really hearing it out and seeing how it plays out and not being the first one. And yeah, some people might be rewarded for being the first one, but like the companies are getting big enough now where people are like, let's just hold back and see what happens. And even at the state level, like once the state legalizes, it's still 2 to 3 years before the local credit unions will like start to work with you. And they're like, they need to see a license first and foremost. So like they're already just going to wait until the licenses get rolled out. And so even if there's like federal medical businesses, it's like, now they still got to go through the whole DEA process, get the license, set up the regulations. And even then they're going to have their own risk committee. We're already kind of making money serving companies that have been federally legal for decades. So let's not mess with that. And then candidly, like Visa and Mastercard, they transact just volumes of billions of dollars of transaction. And so the cannabis industry is very small, like in the grand scheme of things, for being like, hey, think about us, take us serious. It's either they're really not thinking about us. We think about it every day because our clients are all in it, but overall, not really for everybody else. Last 2 questions, because I want to get you out of here. So you guys just thinking through kind of, because we agree, even in B2B, there is a lot of cash transactions. I didn't really appreciate this until I started working in cannabis. And it's like, it's not uncommon to have tens of thousands or 6 figures be transacted in cash. And it's like, it does become cash controls need to be tighter. We have a vault and there's the security and all that stuff. But it's another asset that we need to take track of. And it's like, it's just a thing that's unique to this industry. So I guess if a dispensary or even a product manufacturing house or a wholesaler wants less cash in their business or in their store, what would you say are some of the safer non-cash options that they can use right now? Or that just, you think that could be an option coming down the line?
Beautiful question. I appreciate the way that you phrased that. We've seen several times with our different community bank partners here in Minnesota. I've had the pleasure and opportunity to sit on panels with some highly qualified bankers. We have partners across the nation. I'm going to be speaking next week down in New Mexico at the Association for Cannabis Bankers meetup. And if you're going to be there, I'm not sure if this is going to be live by next week, but this is where we're finding a lot of this information, and bankers are talking, and banking and payment go hand in hand because we need a place to be able to put the money. And if the account gets shut down, we get into a lot of issues of payments get failed, they don't go through, and we don't make our money on it. So we're highly incentivized to make sure that the banking programs are working too. And one of the panels I was sitting on, a banker was talking about how there are some community outreach branches that can only handle $30,000 transactions per day. And you know as well as I do, some of these cultivations, they have transactions $250,000, $500,000 plus for these larger crop harvests. And these banks physically cannot handle the cash, not even considering the cost that it takes to transport it, the risk of an employee that is carrying that cash in a car, even unmarked. There's a huge risk with that because criminals are very intelligent. These are not the proverbial stoners or proverbial headies that are lurking around the corner waiting for you to bring your cash. These are highly trained, highly intelligent criminals that will be able to find out who the owner is by watching the parking lot. So take that in consideration of if you have a cash-based B2B organization, if you have a problem of not able to deposit all of the money per day, that runs into a cash flow issue because all of a sudden payroll becomes a problem. Your vendor management agreements start becoming at risk, and your days of sales outstanding significantly increase. And that's when bad debt starts to really come into play. And so our product, we allow for funding to be deposited into your bank account the next day, up to $1 million per transaction. And we've seen our product take pretty decent adoption for the B2B marketplace. And that's where I think a lot of our true opportunities is because of our direct relationship and partnership that Intuit Enterprise Suite is taking us on as a partner directly with Intuit. And so that's a big thing to say, especially in line. And we're incredibly thankful for the relationship that we are forming and bridging with. And we're going to be making more and more announcements here soon. But because of the compliance forward initiatives that we're driving, Intuit has recognized the product itself and why we've been able to see so many successful engagements for B2B transporters, manufacturers, any CRB, cannabis-related level 1 or plant-touching business that has unfortunately been shut down by Intuit payments because of the credit card profiles. So if you've been shut down by Intuit but still need your QuickBooks services, we have a direct partnership that allows for reporting into QuickBooks because of the compliance forward product that we have.
Man, that's a real problem though that you guys are solving with your solution out of all payment. And it is. I remember everybody thinks sales and larger payments processing. You're like, perfect, we're growing. What could possibly go wrong until you have a payment not go through? And you look very unprofessional when you're trying to close a deal with a client and they're like, yeah, I tried to pay you. It said it couldn't go through. I remember that happened to me I had a $40K payment coming through for an audit just for my own business. And I was like, oh my God, it was a mess. Like when you start to get past these certain increases, how do people qualify for such large payments? Is that something that you guys do internally to be like, okay, these companies qualify for a limit of say 100K per transaction? Because I imagine the bank doesn't just let anybody sign up to process 500K because again, there's just all these risks. So how do they set their limits? And that's just a quick question that just popped into my head. Like, how do they set the limits? Because that's a big solution.
Yeah, great question. It all comes down to what is the anticipated monthly volume. And we have a conversation with the client about what is realistic, what are you currently facing, and it's more of a risk tolerance from our perspective. And so we set different caps because of the potential for fraud. And so cannabis businesses are targeted more heavily because of the industry, and people know that it's a cash-heavy space. And so we set caps of, let's say that your business is typically doing $40,000 transactions if you're a smaller cultivation site. If you have a transaction that comes through for $300,000, that's going to cause some red flags from our side. And it's not because it is a bad transaction, it's because it's irregular. And we've had situations with cultivators that they're doing $400,000 transactions and going through our process and going through our system, but it's because they've alerted us and showed us the contracts. They've shown us the legitimacy of those transactions. And it's because of those steps that we take that we're able to not only receive those funds, but more importantly, deposit them next day into the bank account.
That is interesting. That makes way more sense. And I'd rather talk to my payment processor to explain the business and why it works than to have to talk to some other unknown payment processing company. Why is this a regular payment? Because that's what it is. It's like, you don't ever want to, we know it's legal, like it's all just normal business transactions, but you almost don't want to have a weird irregular one because if it gets held up, it'll held up cash flows. Just like you said, it's like it'll cause these downstream effects if we have a wire getting reviewed, which does happen. So if you're in business, you're going to get some wires reviewed. But if your payroll's 40K and you're just like, yeah, that's just going to be there. And then you're like, oh, all right, now we got to dip into the cash reserve. I know it's coming, but it just creates more things that I don't need to think about. So that's why I'll leave people with these thoughts. So try to work with somebody like a Don if you can, because like payment processing, whether you're B2B or B2C, it's still a very impactful to your business. And with that being said, be mindful of your time here, Don. The rest of the year, I know you're going to be at the bankers conference, which I agree. It's like, just go talk to the bankers in cannabis. They'll tell you what they're thinking. They're trying to do business with you, but you got to do business with them. But what has you excited about the next 1 to 3 years for Evolve Payment?
Yeah, great questions. I think that with some of the partnership opportunities that we're placing, especially with some of these terminals that have been placed, that have been shut down, we have some really great relationships that are just now kicking off that I'm not at liberty to announce formally yet. But if you have a terminal that is with a very large organization and you're looking for a compliant platform to place a product on, we do have the capabilities where you don't even need to have a hardware solution sent to you. I'll leave it at that.
Hey, that's enough. That's enough to be excited about, because we still use a lot of cash, still use a lot of ATMs. And to your point, we could be doing this for another 5 years as a norm, and we'll always get solutions as we get the opportunities. But right now, this is where we're at. So thanks so much, Don, for just your insight into the payment processing and just what you guys are doing with Evolve. I know we'll be crossing paths again. I really like you guys' solution and just how you guys carry yourselves, how you're trying to approach the industry. And so thanks again for your time, Don. I'll let you get out of here. Make sure you can get over there to pick up your kiddo. But you have a good one, Don.
I appreciate it. And thank you to you, and thank you to Dope CFO Certified Advisors for providing quality content and having me join as a guest for this webinar. Thank you.
Awesome. Be well, Don. Talk to you later. Bye.